Thank you for joining Jennifer Schaus and Associates in our 2019 Webinar Wednesday series. We are coming to you live from downtown Washington, D.C. Our webinars are every Wednesday, and you can find the upcoming schedule on our website. Past webinars and all recordings are also on our website and on our YouTube channel, along with over 160 other recordings on federal contracting topics. All are complimentary. If you have questions for our speaker today, you can email him directly with the contact information you'll see on the last slide. All right, this is just a little bit about us. We are a Washington, D.C. based firm and provide services for federal contractors. This ranges from market analysis reports to proposal writing and also post-award compliance. More information is on our website, so please visit us there. And these are a couple upcoming events, so you can find more information here, also on our website. And we do offer advertising, so you can email this email if you would like more information on that. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Our speaker today is Ryan Bradle, and he's going to be covering service-disabled veteran-owned small business contracting at the VA versus DOD versus other agencies. Thank you, Ryan, for joining us, and I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you.
Okay, thanks very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm excited to speak to you today. This is the third in the series of webinars that I've given today on service-disabled veteran-owned small businesses, or SDVOSBs. The first was about understanding the requirements of becoming an SDVOSB. The next was about the benefits of being an SDVOSB. And then with this session, we're going to focus in on the unique program at the VA, which I touched on in my prior webinars, but we're going to really drill down on contracting with the VA as an SDVOSB and what are some of the pros and cons of doing that versus contracting at specifically at the DOD, but also other agencies. So next slide. So high level, what we're going to cover is just first of all the Veterans First program, which I touched on in the last webinar, but that's the VA's program for contracting with SDVOSBs. That program has a pre-verification requirement, so we're going to talk about that. And then next, we're going to talk about a recent development in the law as of October of last year, which sort of joined together in certain ways the VA's SDVOSB program with the SBA's SDVOSB program. Then we're going to talk about contracting at the DOD, how the DOD goes about meeting its small business contracting goals. And then lastly, the advantages and challenges of SDVOSB contracting at the DOD. Next slide. So for those who were on my the last webinar, this is a bit of review, but for those who are new, I want to make sure we understand the main grounding of the Vets First program. But the Veterans First program at the VA is a legal requirement that all VA procurements be set aside for competition among SDVOSBs or VOSBs, that's veteran-owned small businesses, if there is a reasonable expectation that two or more responsible SDVOSBs will submit an offer, and the award can be made at a fair and reasonable price. So this is the rule of two that we covered before, but the main point is that SDVOSBs have an absolute priority for contracting at the VA. So for the VA's requirements. They have, as we talked about last time, the Supreme Court has declared that they have a priority over ordering on the GSA schedule. And this requirement also applies when another agency contracts to provide the VA with goods or services. So the main point to understand is that the Veterans Administration is under a Vets First requirement that gives service-disabled veteran-owned small businesses priority in contracting. Next slide. Now, the catch here is that in order to be able to contract with the VA, an SDVOSB has to submit to a pre-verification requirement. So any contractor that wants to do, set aside work as an SDVOSB for the VA has to submit an application to the VA's Center for Verification and Evaluation and receive pre-approval as an SDVOSB. So You got to get approved before you can bid on any VA contracts. This is different from the SBA's SDVO SB program, which is, when I say the SBA's program, the SBA runs it, but it's the program under which SDVO SBs can contract with every other agency of the federal government. That program is a self-certification program, so no advance approval is required. All that a company has to do is certify that it is a valid SDVO SB, and that's sufficient to be able to bid on a contract. Now, of course, if a company wins a contract, if an SDVO SB wins a contract, they are potentially subject to protest from the other companies that didn't win the contract, and the protesters can allege that the company is not a valid SDVO SB. And at that point, the SBA will conduct an investigation to determine whether you are in fact a valid SDVO SB. But it's important to understand the distinction between the two programs. The VA, it's pre-verification. You have to be a verified, approved SDVO SB to work for the VA. All other agencies, it's a self-certification system, but that certification is subject to protest. Okay, next slide. So, what does it take to be certified in advance by the VA? It's an online web-based system. So I've listed the website here, va.gov/OSDBU/verification. That's where you go. It will provide all of the instructions that you need to submit your application for verification as an SDVO SB. One important thing to note is that SDVO SBs must apply for re-verification every 3 years. So your verification is only good for 3 years. The VA's web-based system will send you reminders to remind you that, hey, your 3-year period is coming up. It's time to reapply. But it's very important that you get your application in as early as possible to avoid any problems, because if the 3-year period runs before the VA has had a chance to re-verify you, you will be delisted. You will not be listed as a verified SDVO SB, and that will certainly affect your eligibility to bid on set-aside contracts at the VA. So the point is, it's very important to stay on top of your verification and make sure that you do the renewal in advance. Next slide. So I want to talk a little bit about, just at a high level, what they're going to ask you for in order to be verified at the VA, and how to get your documents in order. I mean, first and foremost, they're going to ask for your corporate documents. So your articles of incorporation or your articles of organization, if you're an LLC, operating agreement and bylaws, any shareholder agreements, voting agreements, basically all of the documents that legally govern the structure and operations of your business. And, of course, the main purpose there, most of the controversy surrounding whether a company is a valid SDVO SB, it doesn't have to do with whether the owner is truly a veteran. It's very rare that we have anybody, committing fraud and saying they're a veteran when they're not. Most of the controversy surrounds the structure of the company and whether the veteran has full ownership and control of the company. And if you were on my first webinar, I went into a lot of detail as to what ownership and control looks like. But the VA is going to conduct an intense examination and comb your corporate documents with a fine-tooth comb to make sure that the service-disabled veteran has full ownership and control of the company. They're also going to, but part of that analysis also involves looking at the resumes of all the owners, directors, partners, and key employees. So that's going to be part of what the VA is going to request when you apply. Tax returns are important. That goes to the issue of the size of the company and whether it's a small company. And they're also going to look at if the tax returns reveal any payment arrangements that might undermine the ownership and control of the service-disabled veteran. They're also going to look at your last 5 contracts or proposals. They're going to examine those to understand how the company operates and make sure that the SDV controls the company. They want to look at payroll for largely the same reason. Make sure that the SDV is the highest paid employee at the company. That's one of the core requirements. Bank signature cards. If there's a person other than the SDV who has that has signatory authority with the company's bank, that's going to be something that the VA is going to be concerned about, is showing that the service-disabled veteran doesn't have control. The required licenses, so any sort of government license is required. Often these are state government requirements. If you're a construction company having your contractor's license, that license has to be in the name of the service-disabled veteran, and so the VA is going to examine that. They're going to examine your leases and your management agreements, any other sort of arrangements that you have with other companies that are part of the day-to-day operation of your business. They're going to look at that to make sure that everything's in order and the veteran and that the company is not overly reliant on another company to stay alive. And the same point with the joint venture agreements and the mentor protege agreements. They want to make sure that this company is standing on its own and that it's not just a front for another company. But the bottom line here, the point is that this is a very thorough examination by the VA. So if you want to become a VA verified SDVO-SB, you have to be prepared for a very intense examination by the VA. The same thing doesn't happen at the SBA. The SBA, you self-represent. This examination would happen if you were protested. So it's a back-end verification where the VA is on the front end, but you got to be prepared for it. Next slide, please. And to that point, it's very important to make sure that all of your ducks are in a row and that all of your documents are in order before you file the application. So I strongly encourage review by a consulting company or a law firm to ensure that there's no hidden issues in your corporate documents that you might not be aware could prevent you from becoming a verified SDVO-SB. And the reason why it's important is because if the VA finds a problem, you have to wait 6 months before you can reapply. So that could have a profound effect on your company if there's a contracting opportunity coming down the pike, and you have to wait 6 months. That would be not a very good turn of events. So it's important to have everything in order before. There can be a lot of hidden issues that could affect a company's eligibility. All right, next slide. Now, it was the case for a long time that the VA and the SBA had different standards for what constituted an SDVO-SB. They weren't drastically different. The differences were pretty small and minute, at least at first glance. But they did have some different views on what constituted ownership and control. And so it led to a situation where a company could be a verified SDVO-SB under the VA's program, but if the SBA took a look at it, they would determine that the company was not a valid SDVO-SB because of slight distinctions on what ownership and control meant. Needless to say, this led to a lot of confusion and consternation for a lot of companies. And so as of last year, they unified the requirements. So they're operating on the same sheet of music now. The requirements are the same for both programs. Now, the VA still administers its own program, and it still conducts the pre-verification. Well, the SBA administers its own program. But the point is the requirements are the same. There's no longer any differences. And the other point is that if the VA denies an application, that can then be appealed to the SBA. So the precedents are being unified. Before, the SBA didn't touch the VA's program, but now the SBA is is bringing some uniformity to the two programs. Next slide. And I just covered this topic, but it's just basically the point that the SBA is handling the appeals, and so there's no longer going to be any disparity between whether a company is eligible under the VA's program or the SBA's program, but they do remain two distinct programs. All right, next slide. A few points that I want to highlight in this new rule, because it's very important. It's less than a year old. A lot of companies may have been, eligible under one program and not the other, and now they've been unified. So it's important to understand the distinctions. So the recent changes is that they made consistency in the few exceptions to the requirements for absolute control. I covered those in greater detail in the last webinar, but essentially they've enumerated the exceptions under which a veteran does not need to have absolute control for the protection of any minority shareholders. And minority shareholders being able to be protected is an important factor in the company being able to get equity investment. They eliminated the full-time devotion requirement. It used to be that the veteran had to devote full-time to the business. They eliminated that requirement, but they did replace it with the rebuttable presumption that if the veteran has to work during normal business hours and in close proximity, in commuting distance to the company's headquarters. If the veteran does not fulfill these requirements, there's a presumption that the veteran is not, running the company. The service-disabled veteran must receive a profit distribution that is commensurate with ownership interest. So a lot of times, veterans would own, 90% of the company, but they would give more of the profits to the minority shareholders. That's no longer permissible. So that's an important change to be aware of. Next slide. And just continuing down this list of important changes, if there is any change to the company's bylaws or operating agreement that creates new supermajority voting requirements, you have to inform the VA of those in advance. So that's an important change. The requirement that we've been talking about, that the service-disabled veteran has to be the most highly compensated, that's new. That was not in the VA. In the SBA's rules. So that's a new change under this unified program. There is now it's allowed to have a right of first refusal in the event of the death or incapacity of the veteran. So that means that if the veteran were to die or become incapacitated, any other shareholders would have a right of first refusal to buy the veteran's shares. That was not allowed previously. So that's a new development. And then this is a really big one. In order to qualify, the service-disabled veteran has to be small in its primary NAICS code. As we talked about in the prior webinar, the NAICS code established size standards, but they vary from NAICS code to NAICS code, the size standard. And so if the company is not small in its primary NAICS code, then it's not small at all. And that's a big change that is causing a lot of frustration for SDVO SBs. It's something to be aware of. Okay, next slide. So now that we've talked about how the program has been unified, I want to talk about contracting at the DOD. And sort of a busy slide here, a lot of information here. But this is an important slide that to look at and to understand. And what this shows is that each agency within the DOD has established its own small business prime contracting goals, which is sensitive to that sub-agency's mission. So overall, the DOD has to contract 23% of its total dollars to small prime contractors. But obviously that can't apply across every sub-agency. So, let's look at a couple of outliers here. For example, the Defense Communications Agency, which is in the middle of the page, Over 60, their goal is to contract 60% of their dollars to small businesses. It's a very high number. And the reason why is because the work that they need is conducive to small businesses. And so, so they're able to contract a lot more. The other outlier, if you see at the top of the page on the right, the defense microelectronics activity, that's 2%. Their mission is such that they just can't really contract much to small businesses. And so the point of this slide is to understand that when you're contracting with the DoD, there's a wide range of capabilities that different agencies need. And so it's important to do market research and understand your customer and understand where to focus your fire. Don't spend time trying to get a contract at the defense microelectronics activity because they're just not really interested in contracting with small businesses, or they're not able to given their mission. Next slide. And the last point that I want to cover is just DoD contracting more broadly. What are some of the advantages of contracting with the DoD as an SDVO/SB, and what are some of the challenges? The first, the biggest, and this is kind of an abstract point, but it's an important point, and it's that the Department of Defense, for obvious reasons, has really taken its commitment to contracting with SDVO/SB seriously. And they really make a strong effort to contract with SDVO/SBs. And so if you're an SDVO/SB, it's important to know that you have an ally and a friend at the DoD, and that you're likely to get a lot of opportunities there. Another important point is the DoD has its own unique mentor protege program. There's a government-wide mentor protege program for other agencies, but the DoD has its own program. And it's a program that's really helpful to small businesses. And so focusing on the DoD would allow an SDVO/SB to participate in that program. The DoD encourages joint venture contracting. A lot of agencies are wary of joint venture contracting, but the DoD, for a variety of reasons, likes to joint venture contract, and that's a good way for an SDVO/SB to develop its capabilities and to work on contracts that it might not otherwise be able to work on, is to joint venture with another company that offers complementary capabilities. One drawback is that the DoD has been very vigilant in monitoring its contract with SDVO/SBs, and it's conducted a number of OIG inquiries into SDVO/SB contracting, and has very tight controls in place to ensure the integrity of the program. Now, the reason I make that point is not to dissuade you from contracting with the DoD, but just to help you understand that the DoD is very vigilant about this, and so all the more reason to really have your corporate documents, buttoned up and ensure that you are a valid SDVO/SB before contracting with the DoD. Next slide. And that wraps up the presentation today. I hope it was helpful in understanding how to contract as an SDVO/SB with the VA and with the DoD. I'd be happy to answer any questions by telephone or email. And thank you for your time.
Thank you for sharing your knowledge and insight today. Today's presentation has been recorded and can be found on our website or YouTube channel within about 48 hours. If you have questions about today's topic, please contact Ryan at the phone number or email shown on your screen. Thank you, everybody. This concludes the webinar.
Thanks.